Thank you, Andrea. And I want to welcome everyone to this timely presentation on preparing your home and property for wildfire. Unfortunately, the threat of wildfires and the effect of wildfires is something that has become a way of life for us in the state and really throughout the West. Not that it's needed, but this summer is yet another wake-up call regarding the threat of wildfires in our state. And all indications are that we will be breaking new records this year, but in a bad way. Presently, I probably don't need to tell you if you watch the news at all, but presently 16,000 firefighters are on the front lines of 15 major wildfires. And since the beginning of the year, there's been 6,600 fires and about 1.8 million acres have burnt. At all levels, fire agencies in the state are now preparing for the potential of more significant wildfires due to critical weather conditions that are affecting the entire West. This is coming after 2020, which is by far the worst year for wildfires since we began tracking that. 5 of the 10 largest fires in California history occurred in 2020. And in the past 20 years, 17 of the most destructive wildfires in California history have occurred. And that does not include the Oakland Hills fire in 1991 and the Jones fire in 1999, which occurred in Shasta. Now, there are many reasons that fires are becoming more destructive. CAL FIRE estimates that over 2 million homes are presently located in extreme risk wildfire areas, and much of the East Bay is included in that area. Historically, right here where we live, there's been large fires, very large fires have occurred in the Oakland, Berkeley Hills, 1923, 1970, and of course, 1991. According to another CAL FIRE study, sudden oak death and bark beetles have accounted for about 150 million dead trees in California forests alone. And that's contributed to the severe conditions that we presently have. And due to the changing climate, 6 of the hottest days since records have been kept recorded in the last 5 years. And just last month in July was the hottest month ever recorded in California. I'm sure most of us don't forget some of those temperatures. And I remember looking at the news and seeing it was, I think it was like 125 in Death Valley. And we were pretty warm here too. And I'm sure you all recall what it was like last year around this time in August and September. I remember that day when it looked like we were on Mars. It was red and hot and the air was terrible. It has clearly begun again this summer, and we've all been living through the last few weeks. If you're anything like me, I check my AQ index about every hour, and I'm constantly just checking the CAL FIRE fire map to see, where fires are occurring. Unfortunately, this has become the new normal, and we need to learn how to live with the threat of wildfire and hopefully take steps to reduce the risk. The most important measures you can take are hardening your home and firescaping. Now, hardening is taking the appropriate steps to greatly improve the chance of your home and structures withstanding ignition by wildfire, embers, and other factors. You hear the term defensible space several times today, and that's creating and maintaining defensible space area up to 100 feet out from your property. This is a way to harden your home and your property. Firescaping is also another major strategy for fire prevention. My co-presenter Hedwig will be discussing this topic, but basically firescaping is landscape design that reduces house and property vulnerability to wildfires. And the goal in firescaping is to develop a landscape with a design and choice of plants and other materials that offers the best protection while also enhancing your property. I'm going to start by talking about hardening, and I just showed a picture here on the screen of a property before and after. And obviously it's the after photo that we're all striving for. And I think you can see the difference on that. Now, hardening your home, is a broad topic, but it's not fireproofing your home, but it addresses the most vulnerable components of your property with materials and techniques that increase the resistance to the sources of fire. And I'm going to go through some of those right now. So in my part of the talk today, first, as background, I'll talk about the 3 types of risks your home may be exposed to during a wildfire. Then I will explain a little bit more about defensible space, which is the area between your home and an oncoming wildfire. And then briefly, I will talk about fire code, and I'll end the discussion talking about notification systems and fire preparedness. So in order to protect your property from wildfire, it will help to identify the 3 main ways your property can catch on fire. Those are direct flame, radiant heat, and embers, which are also called firebrands. Understanding that these are the threats can assist in critically evaluating where you may need to focus your preparedness efforts in order to make your property as fire safe as possible. So the first threat is direct flame. Direct flames from wildfires are often not hot enough to just ignite your home on its own. Though depending on the time and the exposure, direct flame contact can ignite your home and the surrounding property. Though flames often will not ignite the home, plants on your home, around your home, and other flammable materials close to the home can catch on fire. If these catch on fire and the heat gets hot enough, what will happen is it can break a window, and then it will allow the fire to possibly enter your home. Radiant heat is the next threat. Radiant heat is generated from burning structures or vegetation, and it can get hot enough to ignite a house without direct flames. This is particularly challenging in densely populated areas like subdivisions, where the heat from one house or one property can burn can burn a home next to it, and it sometimes will create a chain reaction. And that's what happens in some of the subdivisions that are burnt. We saw that in Santa Rosa at the Coffee Park area. That was a subdivision, and it just was like one house to the next house. Embers or firebrands are responsible for most of the home ignitions, and they cause 2 out of every 3 structure fires in a wildfire. Embers are small pieces of burning material that can travel, most people say up to a mile. Our fire chief here, Chief Winokur, says he's seen them travel up to 2 miles ahead of the front of a wildfire. And they can create spot fires when they land on a receptive fuel bed, like a gutter filled with debris, like dry vegetation around your house, a wood deck, a porch, a trellis. The embers can get under the siding of your house. They can get into cracks and stucco. They can ignite they can ignite a house even if the vegetation doesn't catch on fire. So sometimes if there's a fire, let's say, a mile or two from where a house catches on fire, people are really puzzled on how that house caught fire. And it will be from an ember going in through a vent or getting into a gutter that's filled with debris. Presently, I'm sure everybody has heard about the Calder fire, and that's threatening the Tahoe Basin now. And the main threat of that right now, they're really, thinking that the embers reaching Echo Summit, if the wind's going the right way, those embers will get down into Tahoe Basin, and it's a major threat to that area right now. There are various definitions of defensible space that can be used depending on the location of your property. Today, we're going to use CAL FIRE's 3 subzones of defensible space, and that covers an area of about 100 feet from your house, about 100 feet out. And this is called the home ignition zone. The idea in creating defensible space is to interrupt the path of a fire, basically slow it down towards your home, and hopefully firefighters will arrive by then. The basic concept is to reduce the possibility that radiant heat will build up on your property and reduce the potential that embers or flames will ignite the vegetation adjacent to your home. And you create this space between your home and the wildland with the selection of building materials, the designs, and the selection and placement and maintenance of the vegetation that will help your home resist the wildfire. It will also improve the chances of your home surviving and not spreading beyond your property. Many of our fire codes, and I'll get into that in a little bit, will address the need for dispensable space. And later on in the talk, my co-presenter will be focusing on the vegetation aspects, more specifically for defensible space. So the 3 zones in defensible space are basically zone 1, 2, and 3. Zone 1 is the nearest area to a house, and that's like from the house about 5 feet out. And they call that the non-compostable zone. Zone 2 is the mid area, and that is just to help you remember, they call that the lean, clean, and green zone, and that's about 5 feet to 30 feet. And zone 3 is the far area. That's 30 feet plus. And they call that the wildland fuel reduction zone. And I understand, that not everybody has 100 feet of property. So you would adjust accordingly in creating and maintaining defensible space around your property. If a neighbor's home is closer than 100 feet, it's especially important to harden your home in order to reduce the vulnerability of the radiant heat from their house, if it catches on fire, that it will ignite your home. So ideally, if you're friendly, if you can speak to your neighbors about that, it's important to try to coordinate defensible space with your neighbors. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more specific about each of the zones. Zone 1 is a zone from 0 to 5 feet out from your home. And that's an area where you want to try to remove as much as the flammable material as possible. This can also be called the no fuel zone. This includes removing any receptive fuel beds. And by receptive fuel bed, I mean things like leaves, pine needles, mulch, wood chips, debris, dead vegetation, dry grasses, wood piles, propane tanks, and anything that may catch on fire next to the house. Anything that will catch on fire, including mulch, can ignite during a hot enough fire, and they become those flying embers I was talking about before. and they can spread not only to your house, but to neighbor's house. In this zone, at the minimum, you should try to clear at least 2 feet out from your home. Homeowners should also consider the selection of building materials and designs that will help a home resist a wildfire. Importantly, from those embers I was talking about, embers get into homes, like I said, through vents or through on gutters. And so older homes, when they were originally built, and I'm talking homes, from the 50s, 60s, 70s, they originally had like 1/4-inch venting around the house. We're talking about eaves ventings and foundation vents. Now it's recommended, and there's local codes in place that most vents are 1/8 of an inch or smaller. And some new homes in certain areas are requiring ember resistant venting, and like in the picture on the screen here. Ember resistant, let me say this also, ember resistant venting. I recently retrofitted my house. I had almost 40 vents around my house, and I just recently retrofitted with ember resistant venting. It can be costly, but since embers getting into vent is perhaps the leading cause of homes igniting, it may be worth the investment. Up to you. In many cases, in areas of our county, these type of vents are now required even if you're doing major renovations. Besides embers going through the vents, it's also common that embers will go into gutters that are filled with debris. So regularly cleaning your gutters or installing leaf guards can protect against this. Just using myself as example again, I also, before this summer started, I retrofitted my house with a leaf guard, and I feel a lot more secure in my property now, which is in a wildfire area. Now, as a UC Master Gardener, we cannot recommend specific products, but if you're interested in ember-resistant venting or leaf guards, if you search for those on a computer, I'm sure you'll come up with many choices. And I want to stress that doing this work in advance what we're trying to do is to stop or slow a fire, basically until firefighters can arrive. I know that was a lot on the zone right around your house, but it's important. Zone number 2, the goal is to eliminate the connectivity between the islands of vegetation and your home. We like to call this the lean, clean, and green area. Lean is the area closest to your home, and many of the fire codes specifically address this. One of the areas that is often spoken about in the 5 to 30 foot area is called a ladder fuel. And a ladder fuel, what that refers to, and you can see the picture there, it refers to live or dead vegetation that allows a fire to climb up from the ground landscape into a tree canopy. Once it gets into the trees, it's much more difficult for firefighters to fight a fire. And they call this the laddering effect. And you can see on that slide where the fire would start on the ground and gets up into the trees. And the idea is to create distance between the fuel so the fire cannot jump from one source to the other. So if you have trees, ideally you want to cut tall grass, and you want to open up the distance between the fuels and the first branches of the trees. In our fire code and most fire codes in our county, branches are required to be pruned up either 6 feet from the ground to the first branch on a tree, or 3 times the height of a shrub that's under the tree. Now, if you do any cutting of tree limbs or pruning of shrubs under the tree, as a master gardener, I would just recommend doing this at the correct time of year and using the proper method of pruning, or you may permanently damage your tree or your shrub. And if you don't know, how to prune or when to prune, I'm sure that is readily available, or you can contact our Master Gardener help desk. The clean zone, think of that as good sanitation. Think about it like outdoor housekeeping. It's an ongoing process, just like cleaning your home. You want to remove the dead vegetation, the debris, pine needles, and such. And finally, green. All plants will burn, but healthy, hydrated plants will add protection to your home. And Hedwig will be talking more about the specific plants you might want to plant around your home. Zone 3, the wildland fuel reduction zone. The idea is to reduce the energy and fire, reduce the energy and spread of fire by eliminating continuous dense vegetation, both vertically, like the trees, and horizontally. So it's like thinning out your land, beyond that 30-foot area. If possible, the separation should be about 10 feet between trees on flat areas and more on slope. And also cut down shrubs, especially around the shrub. Make sure your weeds are cut and your grasses. And it's also I just want to note that if you live near a riparian area, that many of these areas are protected waterways and regulated by local county and state regulation. And many of them prohibit cutting of vegetation in the riparian area. So you would just have to check your local code or check with your local city.
Hey, Steve, it's Andrea. I just want to give you a 5-minute warning, okay?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So concluding this section, just try to remember removal of, reduction of, and replacement of. And while defensible space is important and great to do, you cannot affect to make the actual home as fire resistant as possible. So I just want to, I need to talk a little about fire codes. All of us who live, anywhere come under a certain fire code. Every 3 years, every jurisdiction can make changes to their fire code. And we're all on the same schedule. So all jurisdictions did it in 2020, and you can find the fire code on the website of your local fire agency. On the screen now is the 2020 MOFD changes. This is one I'm most familiar with, and I'm just using this as illustrative. And just to give you a few ideas, a few items that we changed in our fire code here in 2020, no bark or organic mulch within 2 feet of the structure, all removal of all Monterey pines and eucalyptus within 6 feet of a structure. The new code requires exterior fire hazard inspections prior to any real estate transfer. And we gave people almost 3 years for the next part, which is the removal of all juniper and bamboo within 10 feet of any roadway. Most jurisdictions will send you out notices prior to this. So the community warning system, just very briefly, is generally used only for life-threatening incidents, and it can contact you in any way that you sign up for. This system that we have in Contra Costa County is actually the model for the entire United States. And if you only do one thing as a result of this talk today, if for those people, the whatever it was, 30-something% that have not signed up, I really recommend that you sign up. I just want to go through two other really quick notification systems. Nixel. Nixel is a site that is routinely used to transmit non-life-threatening messages to area residents. If you text your zip code to 888-777, you'll get a message back. You can sign up with your local fire agency. And then finally, Pulse Point. It's a free app that runs on your phone. The app can be set up to follow your local fire agency and can alert you as soon as a fire, as soon as your local fire district fire, provider is dispatched. So this is really cool. If you don't have this, if you hear a siren, if you're sitting in your house, you go on the app, you can say, oh, they're going next door, next street over for maybe a medical emergency. And then also on that, you can click on it. You can actually hear the dispatchers talking to the fire. Finally, my final slide basically is I would be remiss if I just didn't talk a little about being prepared. You've probably all heard about these things, but go bag. I'm not going to get into detail because I don't have a lot of time. Go bags. Have your important documents ready. Have the bag ready. Near medications, money, whatever you need by your front door. Great to have a weather radio with an alert function. Uninterruptible power supply. I think someone's going to put this in the notes, but if you do want to get one of those, 450 VA can run your modem in your house for 18 to 24 hours. You should have a family plan in the case of emergency, plan for your neighbors if they need help, older neighbors, disabled people, whatever, and sign up for your local CERT, Citizens Emergency Response Team. I'm a member. It's great to get yourself prepared and to help your neighbors in the event of an emergency. And also Firewise neighborhood. You can sign up. It takes about 8 homes. You can get all that information from your local fire agency. Key points to remember: do the fuel mitigation work as soon as you can. Be aware of your local fire codes and best practices. Please sign up for CWS. Be prepared because this is not going away. And have a plan. Assist your neighbors if you can. Stay safe. And like we say in CERT, you hope for the best, but plan for the worst. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Hedwig, and I'm glad to take over for part 2. The principle of defensible space that Steve explained to you are really the foundation of firescaping or hardening your landscape. Firescaping is landscape design that reduces the vulnerability of your home and property to wildfire. It is traditional landscaping design, but implemented with the principles of defensible space. So you can develop a landscape with the choice of fire-safer plants and the use of non-flammable material, which will offer you the best defensible space while also beautifying your property.
Hedwig, sorry to interrupt you. Can you turn your camera on, please, so we could see your lovely face?
I don't have it on. Oh, I'm so sorry. There are 4 key components to firescaping. Whether you start from scratch or whether you are renovating an existing landscape, designing your fire-tolerant garden comes first. Maintenance of your property before, during, and after implementing your design is the most important component. And third comes the careful selection and placement of your plants. And finally, getting involved in your community to not only create a Firewise garden, but also a Firewise neighborhood. Before creating a design plan, you need to look at the lay of the land. Good decisions will depend upon topography, your existing vegetation on your property, your location, the local weather, and whether your site can be irrigated. For example, a home located on a brushy site above a south or west-facing slope will require much more extensive planning for defensible space than a house situated on a flat lot with little vegetation around it. As we know, the steeper the slope, the faster a fire will spread. Slopes with a lot of vegetation are particularly hazardous, especially when they are not being irrigated. Like Steve mentioned, the steeper the slope, the farther apart we need to place our plants. And as a consequence, your defensible space will become bigger. So with defensible space in mind, is it possible for us to create a beautiful and fire-tolerant garden? And the answer is yes. We really do not need to hardscape our property like in this photograph, with little or no vegetation at all. Your home's outdoor spaces consist of hardscapes and softscapes. The softscapes are your plants and living elements. Hardscapes are the non-living elements of landscape, like driveways, walkways, the apron around your home, as well as fences and gates, retaining walls, gazebos, and so forth. Designing your hardscape well does not only function as a fuel break, it can really beautify your property as well. Like in this photograph of the Beulah home in Orinda, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, where boulders were used around a koi pond and a concrete walkway around the house without any vegetation growing against the siding of the house or overhanging the roof. I really don't think that Frank Lloyd Wright had firescaping in mind when designing this home, but this is an excellent example of using the principles of defensible space in zones 1 and 2. This more contemporary property is another example where large pavers were used around the main home, as well as a well-irrigated lawn. Concrete walls and steps lead you uphill to a guest house, which is completely built out of non-flammable siding and concrete. The gravel playground in front of the guest house and the retaining wall behind this guest house are also excellent choices here. As you can see, this home is located in a rather wooded area with well-maintained large trees that are thinned and pruned up. The ground vegetation is kept low and well irrigated. The house on this property is a more traditional Mediterranean style home with a very steep driveway. You cannot see it on this photo, but it runs right behind this well-maintained specimen tree all the way past the front entrance, and it really functions as a fuel break. A large rock garden has been created using extra wide stone steps, rocks and boulders, and low-growing plants, all very complementary to the style of this home. And here are some other examples of hardscaping. You can use water, boulders, and rocks for ponds, swimming pools, dry riverbeds, as well as succulent gardens. Fences, gates, and shade structures are best built in metal. Cotton steel is very popular, but can get rather expensive. In my neighborhood, I see a lot of fences similar to the second choice on the bottom row. Most of the time, it's a combination of wood and metal. An alternative to wood, however, is using cement board instead, because that is a much more fire-safe material. And concrete walls, retaining walls, can be designed in a way so they can double function as extra seating. Now we get to the hard part, keeping it all well maintained. It is really a year-round task. The beautiful garden on this photograph is impeccably maintained and cared for. Lush gardens like this are gorgeous, but with the current extreme drought, climate change, and wildfire, can we really still afford designing gardens like this here in California? When it comes to fire-smart landscaping, it is much more important to consider where a plant is situated and how it is maintained than the actual plant itself. The top left of this drawing shows you a lush landscape, similar to the earlier photo I showed you. This garden design does not follow the principle of defensible space. The bottom right drawing shows no plantings near the home. A solitary tree, nicely pruned up and away from the roof, and islands of plantings with adequate space in between. So let's revisit the photograph of the Bueller home for the no ignition zone number 1. This is the most restricted. This zone contains best only non-combustible materials, which means no foundation plants and no vegetation overhanging the roof. It is like creating a non-flammable apron around your home, which will give you the best protection against embers. In Zone 2, plant only low-growing, non-woody plants in ground covers, like succulents, vegetables, flowers, even a lawn are great choices here. It is very important to keep plantings well-spaced, well-irrigated, and well-maintained. Remember, like what Steve said, keep it lean, clean, and green, and remove all vegetation that could catch fire. Creating islands of root plantings with space in between will also give you easy access for maintenance. It is also a good idea to use rock, gravel, and other non-flammable materials in between those islands, as well as around other structures on your property. And like we talked about earlier, be careful with mulch. It could be very flat. Some mulches are extremely flammable. We are giving you a handout tonight that includes an interesting study on the flammability of different mulches. The objective of Zone 3 is to decrease the energy and speed of a fire by eliminating continuous and dense vegetation, both horizontally and vertically. Proper spacing and pruning of your trees and shrubs is very important and will depend on the lay of your land. It is very well possible that some trees and shrubs will need to be removed in order to follow the principles of defensible space. Zone 3 can also reach beyond your property when you live in close proximity of your neighbor, in a townhouse or an HOA community, especially when surrounded by WUI zones. So in summary, on a regular basis, we need to prune and thin our trees, shrubs, and low-growing plants, remove weeds and dead vegetation, as well as keep the roof, eaves, and gutters clean. And last but not least, irrigate according to each plant's needs. The top image shows you a manzanita, neatly pruned up with dead leaves and branches removed. Manzanita is mentioned on both hazardous and fire-safer plant lists. When growing older, manzanita is only green on the top and develops a lot of dry undergrowth, which needs to be removed. And when you prune it well, it almost looks like a garden sculpture due to its smooth, dark bark and interesting twisted branches. On the second image, you see a sloped side with very mature oak trees. They are all nicely thinned out and pruned up. There's only a thin layer of fallen leaves on the ground and nothing growing underneath the oaks. This homeowner also removed quite a few of her oak trees. She also worked together with her neighbor to keep fences clear of vegetation and wind-blown debris. These two photographs show you the same tree, once before maintenance and once after. This is a good example of keeping your landscape clean, lean, and green. And wouldn't you agree that this tree looks so much more attractive with the trunk and lower branches showing? Okay, plant selection. It is important to select the right plant for the right place. Fire-safer plants do exist. Unfortunately, however, with enough heat, all plants will burn. Ideally, we would like to plant California native plants that are low in maintenance, drought resistant, water-wise, and fire tolerant. Choose wisely though, because although California native plants are better adapted to our surroundings, they can also be quite flammable. Proper plant selection requires a lot of research. Many lists of fire hazardous and Firewise plants are available. Unfortunately, none are science-based and are at times even contradicting each other. Our handout tonight includes a list of fire-safer plants from Diablo Fire Safe Council. This is a list, it's a work in progress and is being updated regularly. I'm also sharing useful links so that you can do some of your own research online. During your research of what to plant and what to avoid in your particular landscape, we encourage you to visit local botanical gardens, demonstration sites, as well as private Firewise gardens and landscapes. A lot of literature on firescaping and wildfires is available as well. I'm sure your local librarian can help you with the right reading and research material. When choosing your plants, it is best not to buy impulsively or what looks good in a nursery. Bamboo, fountain grass, eucalyptus, chamise, juniper, and rosemary are all hazardous plants because they build up a lot of dead material. They have tiny leaves that easily ignite and also lose their moisture easily. They have a high volume of vegetation versus the size of the plants, and many of them contain flammable oils. When you compare this to Firewise plants, they have little volume of vegetation versus the size of the plant and a more open and airy form. Most of them have thicker and larger leaves and a high mineral and moisture content. They also produce very little dead material. As I mentioned before, it is best to choose native trees and shrubs that are well adapted and well maintained. In choosing trees, it is also important to keep the longevity and size at maturity in mind. And like Steve mentioned, avoid planting trees in rows or hedges, since this can provide an uninterrupted path of fire. And try to select trees that shed minimal amount of vegetation. And also keep in mind that healthy plants are more fire resistant than plants struggling to survive. Apart from maintenance, we also need to pay attention to our soil and the required conditions for your selected plants. Distressed plants die, wilt, or will produce dead and flammable material. Because of limited time left, I can only give you a few examples. I see juniper often used close to homes and driveways, as it is low maintenance, drought tolerant, and needs very little water. It is, however, also called the green gas can, as it produces a lot of dry and brittle undergrowth, especially when mature. And it also contains a high oil content. Bamboo is mostly grown as a green screen or a hedge. It is best to remove it from structures and entryways, as all bamboo species are flammable, especially because of the wooden stem and dead material. Chamise is a flowering California native shrub, mostly found in chaparral areas, and is holding the soil of many of our California hillsides. Chamise sprouts back easily after fires. It is, however, also highly flammable. Other fire-prone natives are chaparral pea, artemisia because of the debris, coyote brush, and also many more if grown in the wild and not maintained. The Western redbud is one of my personal favorites. It's not only a California native and Firewise, it is also visually very attractive. and a desired wildlife tree or shrub, especially by birds. It is often used as an alternative to prunus. There are several different varieties of monkey flower, which is a California native and produces attractive flowers in the spring. It is also a good choice for a fire-resistant plant. Cacti and succulents are wonderful low-growing plants that have very low watering needs. The fact that they can store up to 80% of available water is pretty amazing. Succulents just love to hug rocks and stone, which adds to the beauty of many hardscape gardens. Succulents are native to many arid areas all over the world, including California. And the reason why they're fire safer is that when exposed to fire, most succulents first boil or char before burning up. And this is because of their high moisture content. Every time I drive by the Gateway Emergency Exhibit Center, I'm reminded of the real threat of wildfires here in California. Getting involved about fire safety is certainly not only about pulling weeds. We need to protect ourselves from ourselves, our neighbors, and the whole neighborhood we live in. The house on the left completely burned down early one morning in Orinda. My friend, also a master gardener, lives next door and had to evacuate in the wee hours, not knowing whether her home would survive or not. Like for so many people this year, last year, and the many years before, it was devastating. The picture on the right shows you the same property, completely leveled down at the cost of the homeowner, who has now to deal with a lien against it. The fire was caused by negligence. If you notice a fire hazardous situation in your neighborhood, please report it. When it comes to wildfire, no single person alone can protect a community. First, we have to work with our immediate neighbors. If your immediate neighbor's property isn't fire safe, chances are that your Firewise property will not survive during a wildfire either. Obtaining a Firewise community status requires a lot of volunteer effort to reduce the risk of spreading wildfires, as defensible space principles are now extended to the whole community, not just your property. Some communities are even required to obtain this status because of the difficulty to get good homeowners insurance. So why not all work together and create a safer neighborhood? Mother Earth will be very pleased and most grateful. This concludes our presentation for tonight. Thank you for attending.